VR is an incredible medium when it's used well. Games like Gorilla Tag and Beat Saber couldn't function without the technology, and games like Superhot, Tetris Effect Connected, and No Man's Sky are significantly enhanced when experienced in VR. First-person shooters as a genre significantly predate popularized consumer VR, and throughout the years we've seen significant leaps in both the game genre and the technology. In recent years, we've begun to see the advent of a new subgenre of FPS games, that being VR FPS games, with some notable examples including Half-Life Alyx, Boneworks, Bone Lab, Veil, Hyperdash, Breachers, and Pavlov. These games take FPS tropes and standards gamers have become used to and build upon them with the immersiveness of VR. Even simple things like reloading your gun become interesting gameplay mechanics in VR, and the immersiveness really brings competitive and story-driven experiences to life. That being said, however, they're not without their issues. Competitive VR FPS games often make matchmaking difficult and confusing for new players. There's little consistency of weapon mechanics between games, death is excruciatingly annoying, and there's even more issues still. So that begs the question, how could we fix these problems? Here's how I would design the perfect VR FPS game. Before we get into that, however, let me preface this video by saying that this is coming from the perspective of a player with some hobbyist game development experience, but no actual industry experience. Any criticisms mentioned in this video are in good spirits and of games that I fully regard as enjoyable and well made. Also, I am aware that more VR FPS games exist than what I'll talk about in this video, but I wanted to focus on games I personally own and therefore can easily get footage of. Okay, that's all. Back to the video. The first step to designing any FPS game, VR or not, is deciding how your movement and weapon handling should work. In VR, immersion is king, and where possible without negatively impacting the player experience, your mechanics should reflect that. In regards to weapon handling, I think that Boneworks and Bone Lab's Marrow 1 physics engine is my personal favorite example of how it should work. Weapons function realistically, and actions like reloading and gripping the gun can be done however the player wants. If you want to shove your old magazine out of your gun, you can. If you want to fire two rifles into the air at the same time, you can. If you want to grab an empty magazine and chuck it into the abyss, you can. The guns are entirely physics-based and can interact with the environment and other objects. In regards to recoil, the most common way of handling it is by rotating the gun in the player's hand to offset the shot, and letting the player use two hands to reduce the rotation. This is a good standard across VR FPS games as it feels most natural to the player. When it comes to picking up items, it's important that the player doesn't actually have to reach for them, which might seem counterintuitive since that would be less immersive. While reaching down to pick up weapons is more immersive, it quickly becomes a major hassle and can be problematic for players who want to sit down while playing. I think this is a case where it's okay to let the player cheat a little and grab weapons even from a short distance. Also, a brief tangent about the actual button inputs to make all this happen. Various VR FPS games have their own control schemes when it comes to holding your gun, grabbing parts of it, picking up objects, and throwing things away. And with every game doing it a little differently, it can be quite jarring even for experienced VR users. In traditional flat screen games, the controls are pretty standard. WASD to move, space to jump, R to reload, left click to shoot, and right click to aim down sights. VR is far from having any kind of control standard like this. So for our purposes, we just need to throw a dart at which scheme is best. I'll use Bone Lab again to demonstrate my personal favorite system. The right trigger with the grip input is required to grab something from long range, but only the grip input is required to grab something from short range, and dropping something is as simple as just letting go of the two inputs. This universally applies to the entire game and it makes everything intuitive. Now obviously some of the more physical aspects of weapon handling that I mentioned are parts of the Marrow 1 physics engine, and while I obviously don't expect developers to implement the entire physics system into their games, being able to interact with your weapons and other objects realistically in VR is essential to immersion, and I want more games to implement systems to make weapon handling more consistent across the ever-expanding VR content library. With those mechanics, we have our weapons, but how should the player move around? This is something that's going to depend a lot on the game, and there's not really a wrong answer, which opens the door for developers to get creative like they already have. You have games with slow, tactical movement like Veil and Pavlov. You have games like Breachers where you can scale heights and mantle ledges. Games like Hyperdash where you can quickly jump over short distances. Games like Stride where you can wall run, slide, and grapple around. And games like the dearly missed Echo Combat that I hope the community, or more unlikely meta, can continue trying to revive. You have to decide what you want and what fits your game, but as long as it's executed well, it can totally work in VR. Once you've decided on that, we have our weapons and movement. And now we have to figure out what happens when someone actually gets shot. And this is one of the most challenging problems in VR FPS games. Dying in any game is annoying, but in VR it is especially so. Now single player games aren't as bad for this. You just take the player back to the menu or their last save, and minus a loading screen, if there ever has to be one, they're back in the game, and all is well. In competitive multiplayer games, this gets a little more complicated. In flat screen games, when you die, you're sitting. You might have a video on the side to pay attention to, you might have a snack you can grab while you wait, and as a result, it's a lot more tolerable to die in a game like Counter-Strike or Apex Legends. Compare this to VR, where you're likely standing and have a bulky headset on your face, making it challenging to eat, drink, or do literally anything else other than just wait. This sucks. So how can we make it better? Two common solutions I see are the floating ghost approach, where you can fly through walls and floors and spectate the match as it progresses, or less commonly the screen approach, where you watch your teammates in a setting more akin to a flat screen game. Both approaches have their own advantages and disadvantages. The ghost approach is great because you can still feel like you're part of the match, and you get a front and center view to the action. The downside to this is that the player can't do anything other than just spectate, and it gets very boring very quickly if the game is slower paced. The flat screen approach is a great alternative to this, however I feel it still hasn't been fully explored yet, so I'll talk about how I think it should, in theory, work. When you die, you get taken to a simple lobby area in front of a giant TV where you can spectate the match, and maybe a little handheld UI to mirror the TV when you move around, similar to the controller window attachment in Steam VR. In the lobby area, you can find your teammates, and possibly the enemies if your game could support that, as well as some simple minigames and maybe even a shooting range to keep you busy while you wait. This approach would be great for slower paced games where players can stay dead for long amounts of time, such as tactical shooters. Whichever approach suits your game best, ensure that you avoid one critical error. Do not apply a grayscale filter to the player's vision for any extended period of time. The purpose of this filter in VR FPS games is to help the player know when they are and aren't dead, but in practice it just makes the experience of being dead that much more annoying since you can't see any colors, so one of the primary senses you experience in VR is significantly downgraded. There are much better ways of conveying that information to the player, like making the player's body translucent, or even just directly telling the player that they're dead using UI. With weapons, movement, and death, we already have the basic framework of a great VR FPS game. And if you're developing a single player game, then you're pretty much set from here to build an awesome experience. But for competitive multiplayer games, there's still a few major components we need to add. Proper matchmaking would be my next step. I find that the ideal setup has new players being able to just hit play and start in a brand new match with players roughly their skill level, using something like skill-based matchmaking. Now I know that skill-based matchmaking can be a bit controversial, and I think it's perfectly fine to offer a skill-based matchmaking free option to players, as well as having the option to select custom servers from a menu similarly to Pavlov. But the primary focus should be a casual, skill-based matchmaking experience. The server browser experience, where players select a server of players constantly cycling maps and modes, is common among competitive VR games, but it is very jarring for new users who don't know the maps and modes of a game, and might end up feeling confused and frustrated playing against veteran players who will absolutely obliterate them before they can even learn the game. The other issue with this system is the uncompetitive nature of hopping into a match on a team that's already lost, and having to sit through a few unwinnable rounds while you wait for a fresh start. Matchmaking can solve this problem and make the experience feel fair and balanced, making playing a VR FPS game as easy as its modern flat-screen counterparts. With matchmaking added, we've created the foundation for a great VR FPS game. It's fun, has good mechanics, and feels intuitive for new users. There's still, however, one glaring issue. There's nothing to work towards. Progression is one of the most overlooked parts of VR FPS games, with many developers seeming to ignore it entirely when designing experiences, and this kills entire games because there's no reason to keep coming back. The lifeblood of competitive experiences are the players, and when people don't return, new people can't join, and this cycle repeats until there's no one left. VR as a whole has been struggling with this issue for years with headsets sitting on shelves, and while I think we're moving in the right direction with VR as a whole, there's still a long way to go, especially in the content replayability department. To fix this, here are the two most important pieces of progression to add to prevent this issue: ranked and level rewards. Ranked is something I wish more VR FPS games had, because it really gives purpose and stakes to what you're playing. You can work towards a new peak rank and show it off to your friends, which helps spread the word about your game and gives players another reason to return. People wanting to come back for a ranked mode perfectly complements a level rewards system. You've seen the basic premise before, where every game you play gives you XP based on your performance towards your overall level, and leveling up unlocks rewards, like skins, modes, weapons, in-game currency, or anything else you can come up with that fits your game. This gives a softer reward track for your players, including ones not interested in ranked, to play for. Having a reason to come back, pick up your headset, and have a fun time is what a lot of VR users, myself included, want. I want a VR FPS game that can be my daily driver, the game I keep coming back to and keep pushing myself to get better at. Progression is what enables players like me to do that. With the elements discussed in this video, you could make a really good game, single player or multiplayer. But before we wrap this up, I have one crazy idea that could, if properly implemented, be a game changer for VR FPS games as we know them. It's very large in scope, and I don't expect most, if any, current VR FPS games to implement anything like this. But what if VR FPS games had flat screen VR crossplay? This would entail creating an incredible VR experience and an incredible flat screen experience in the same game that could play and be competitive with each other. We already see this in a lot of VR-first social experiences like VR Chat and Rec Room, but the flat screen experience is lacking to say the least. But if both experiences could feel truly seamless, the benefits would be immediately clear, since your target audience now encompasses the small but growing VR community and the massive non-VR user base, and more players would help everything else, from matchmaking to finances. There would obviously be many challenges to this, like how VR users can shoot around walls, perform weapon actions at variable speed, and move their body unpredictably. But there are definitely solutions to this, and I'd be interested in seeing what the competitive scene of a game like this would look like. This also wouldn't work in every kind of game, like the again dearly missed Echo Combat. But where it could work, I could see developers making great use of it. VR FPS games are an incredible extension of an incredible genre, and I have no doubts that as the years go on, more and more amazing VR FPS experiences will emerge and push the entire subgenre forward. We've already come a very long way, and as the VR community grows, so will these games, both in fanbase and in depth, and I can't wait to see what lies on the horizon. Hello again! If you're new here, hi, my name is Ferriton, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you who supported my last video. I wasn't expecting anywhere close to the astounding reception of that video. I thought I'd get 100 views max if I was lucky, and you all pushed it to well over 30,000 as of making this video. That's an absolutely mind-blowing number, and I'm incredibly grateful for all the support. I've got quite a few cool videos like this planned covering more VR related things as well as game development in general, and I look forward to sharing it with you all. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you like my content, then please consider sticking around. I'll see you all next time.